A nurse who treated a man dying of Ebola calls the CDC to say, is it okay for me to fly to Ohio? And the CDC says yes. A few days later, she calls the CDC, is it okay to fly to Texas? And I have a fever. And the CDC says yes again. And so begins Cleveland's experience with the Ebola crisis. That's the subject for today's opinion show when we get together with members of the editorial board of the Plain Dealer and the Northeast Ohio Media Group. I'm here with Director of Opinion Betsy Sullivan, Kevin O'Brien, our Deputy Editorial Page Director and columnist, and editorial writers Chris Evans and Sharron Brussard. The Ebola crisis was the biggest story to come down the pike all year. It had a lot of people talking. We had schools shutting down. There have been a lot of questions raised about the response. We have so many places we could start, but let's start with the CDC. I think we probably can all agree that when somebody who has treated a man who died of Ebola calls and says, I have a fever, the proper response is to say, we should get you to a hospital. Does anybody disagree with that?
No, I think that's a good idea.
Well, the head of the CDC said she shouldn't have been allowed to travel, though he did say, that low-grade fever. I have a niece in medical school, so I know that there's actually some linguistic difference between a fever and a low-grade fever. But nonetheless, she shouldn't actually have been traveling at all. This is the more the bottom line, that for whatever reason, the CDC took the rather cavalier attitude that all the nurses that had been frontline treaters of Thomas Eric Duncan in the Dallas hospital were less at risk for getting Ebola than the 50 people he'd contacted when he was not very symptomatic or just showing the symptoms, all of whom were monitored and have gotten through their 21 days, and none of whom have come down with it. So that was the bottom line. Then they had to send some team to a cruise ship to catch one of the others who'd gone off on it. This is the real issue.
And look, the reason they said you're okay is because she didn't have the 100.5 fever. She was at 99.5. But you don't go from 98.6 to 100.5. It climbs, and you would think that when she says, I'm feeling feverish, they'd say, okay, let's get you checked out. And instead, she gets on the plane, which Frontier Airlines has now had to do all sorts of things to convince the public that it's safe.
The other point there was, as soon as Nina Pham, the first nurse, had gotten Ebola and had been confirmed, that just the day before she traveled, there should have been no question in anybody's mind, and it's not clear who she spoke to at the CDC or exactly how they phrased it. They didn't tell her she couldn't fly.
Well, she wasn't on a no-fly list, right?
She should have been. But let's also point out that the CDC claimed that, the hospital said, well, we follow protocol. Turned out the CDC hadn't really put out a very good protocol or gone around training people, and it turned out that their suits were kind of haphazard. The way they did things in the first early hours, they only had partial coverage, which should not have been protocol. So the CDC mucked up on this.
That was not protocol, though, Sharron. I looked at what they have online, and they're very clear that everything has to be covered. It was the lack of training, the lack of supervision, and they also have acknowledged that they have to maybe have increased intensity of protocol in the United States because of the intense way that we treat people in hospitals. It's not comparable to, say, West Africa.
The other thing the CDC did, which borders on despicable, is in the first press conference they say she should not have been allowed to fly.
Right.
Not all America vilifies this poor woman who did something none of us want to do, which is to tend to a man dying of Ebola. And later in the day, they come out and say, well, she did ask, and we didn't say she could fly, we didn't say she couldn't fly. I mean, they put her in a difficult...
They have never clarified exactly who she spoke to or what was said in that conversation.
That's true.
They threw her under the bus.
Right. They should have taken responsibility. That would have helped regain a smidgen of credibility.
Well, she shouldn't have flown, though, either. There is an individual decision that had to be taken there, too, and if she knew enough to call and felt, ill enough to call, the next thing should have been, I should just stay where I am, no matter what they said.
I don't know. I mean, I think
Kevin has a good point about this. personal responsibility on her end
Right.
to be as safe and careful as possible. But on the other hand, the CDC should not have encouraged, she's a bride, so she's going through bridezilla
Right,
stuff, but
exactly.
should not have encouraged her to go out and do all the
Right,
things.
well,
I feel so
CDC should have said
terrible for
no, but she
the
should
bridal
have, yeah.
Okay,
That's what I'm
So-
thinking.
Oh my God.
She's excited about
Yeah,
getting
she
married.
wants to get
She
put-
calls the CDC.
she's got 3 weeks paid
and she's-
vacation, yeah.
And she's like, what
Ready
should I
to go.
do? And whomever she talks to says, hey, don't worry about it.
All right, so it arrives in Cleveland.
Yeah.
It could have been anywhere in America. We get the Ebola crisis here.
This is the
And
center of the universe.
Suddenly,
Everybody comes here.
anybody that's flown on that plane is calling their employer to say, hey, I was on the plane after her. And we see a reaction in Northeast Ohio that most medical experts say is unnecessary. Schools and businesses closed down for
Warrensville,
cleaning. It's
City
sold
Hall
and-
got cleaned.
Right, yeah.
Wait a minute, let's put this in perspective. If Dallas, had taken this maybe as seriously, or the CDC had taken this as seriously as Ohio health authorities and school officials, maybe we wouldn't even be having this conversation in Cleveland, right?
I think he means about the exaggeration. I mean, that you're closing down schools because of, a parent was on the plane or a kid was on the plane. I mean,
And I'm not
A
criticizing
teacher
it.
was on the
That's
plane,
something.
who
That's
had been in
still
the
out.
building. They're going to reassure people by cleaning. They closed for one day to clean the facilities.
Exactly.
I don't see a problem with that.
Their message is, okay, we don't think there's a threat, but we want our employees to feel completely safe. We're going to take the steps necessary to clean it. And part of it, I think, is based on the mixed message that the CDC was putting out. In the first day of this, it was, nobody's really on a watch list. We're not really paying attention. But within 24 hours, they're calling everybody that flew on the plane. And by Saturday, they've built a classification system with more than 100 people, where some are getting their fever checked twice a day. People are hearing all of this and commenting, saying, I don't know what to believe. This really scares me. I'm going to take every precaution I can.
But in fact, that actually has been the way they've handled Ebola before. If you are showing symptoms, you are potentially infectious, and therefore, the abundance of caution is necessary, because the only way to really corral an outbreak is to catch everybody and keep them within that ring of observation. So they failed with the healthcare workers, but now they're making up for it.
But they didn't start that abundance of caution until 3 days after the news of this came out. I mean, in the first couple of days, the relative of Amber Vinson was on a self kind of isolation. By the weekend, he was being put into isolation by authorities. It seemed like the local authorities were caught not ready for this. The CDC was not very helpful in those opening days. By Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, when John Kasich came up and had a press conference, everybody had their act together. Things were, and since then it's been very steady, but it took 3 days to get there. What do you think of the CDC?
Well, I think people were counting on the CDC to take the lead and tell everybody what to do. And the CDC went into reassurance mode right away. They didn't want a public panic, which makes sense. You don't want public panics for obvious reasons. But the way they handled it, though, led to what? A public panic of sorts. It's not people running around in the streets and, jumping off ledges or anything like that. But it's people not being able to live their daily lives the way they thought they were going to be able to, and worrying about things that probably they don't really need to worry about. But I guess that's where you have to get to when you let the genie out of the bottle in the first couple of days and you let people travel around. The CDC should have cracked down on that hospital and the crew and said, look, now, I don't know what you guys think, but here's what we think. The folks who treated him shouldn't be going anywhere. They should be staying put, and they should be monitored, because we don't know how you handled it.
Right, but I think, the panic manifested. I mean, to me, it was a lot of fear-mongering. And you have this guy in the casino, the Horseshoe Casino, who gets charged with a felony because he makes a crack about, he's staying away from his ex-wife, who's got Ebola, and, again, this guy's he's arrested. He's charged with a felony for inducing panic. Of course, the casino doesn't shut down. I mean, they closed a little area where he was for 5 minutes and sprayed some air freshener in the air.
It's about gambling.
Right, exactly. It's all about gambling.
All right, but what's the big picture? Genie out of the bottle. It is genie out of the bottle in West Africa. This is the biggest explosion of Ebola in the human population ever. There's some who say because it's a virus similar to the cold virus, the flu virus, it mutates, it now that it's in a huge reservoir of people, it could mutate in ways that are really scary. So another part of this is actually making sure that our healthcare system is equipped to handle this. What if Amber Vinson had not gotten on that plane back to Dallas? She would be at the Cleveland Clinic or University Hospitals or, the
Metro. Yeah.
Metro, or down in Akron right now,
Right.
being treated. And we would be confronting all those same issues as the Dallas hospital, that our, frontline healthcare workers are not adequately trained. They're not used to putting on protective gear. The protective gear, maybe we need some extra protocols to disinfect people as they're coming out of the Ebola zone. I mean, really. And then now hospitals are like questioning their staff. Will you show up if we have an Ebola patient? And guess what answers they're getting?
Yeah,
No
no,
way.
negative.
So I do think that this is a much bigger issue than CDC's flat-footed response, which, fortunately, the White House recognized and named the Ebola czar to be the kind of more overall
Yeah, but I mean,
guide.
the bottom line is no one's been diagnosed with Ebola in Ohio. I mean, there are people that have been quarantined and there's people being monitored, but
But Amber Vinson has Ebola, and she was in Ohio for days. So Ebola was in Ohio.
right, but as of today, as of right now, no one's been diagnosed.
Right, but
With Ebola.
but you keep hearing officials saying people shouldn't worry. Nobody has been diagnosed with Ebola in Ohio, and the perception is that there was no threat. She was symptomatic when she was in Ohio, so Ebola was present in Northeast Ohio for some amount of time before she flew out of here.
Well, the follow-on line to that is, but in the event that it happens, we will now be prepared. And we'll know who's going to show up for work. We'll know that we have the protective gear in our possession, and we'll have procedures in place to be able to handle it. Once you're done with the CDC level, it's the locals who matter. The people who are right there where a case arises, and they're either able to handle it or they're not.
But do we think that the locals are ready with the right messaging? And I ask this, one of the most interesting emails we got during this was a guy who had flown out of Hopkins before this started, flies back in after. And as he's passing the restroom, which Amber Vinson had used, they have a huge barrier over the door, and the people going through the barrier to clean it are in full hazmat suits. And he's struck by the thought that when I flew out of here, all the people that were using that restroom weren't in those protective suits. If there's no threat, why are these people cleaning it in protective suits? And you get, the airport is sending people in to clean that bathroom. Of course they're going to be in those suits. But the message to that guy and to anybody else who's going through is, how dangerous is this? Are our local officials ready with the right message to reduce the anxiety people will feel?
Well, I don't know that it's a question of reducing anxiety so much as being ready for the actual event. I mean, that's the important thing. People are going to worry until they decide it's time to quit worrying. But the local officials and the local hospitals and medical, professionals, they're going to react to this. I mean, if there's a silver lining to any of this, it's that, okay, we've had our warning shot, now we're ready to go here, we need to get ready to go. We have a fabulous public health system, a fabulous medical system in this country. We have a long history of concern for hygiene and that sort of thing. Ebola is not going to be the kind of thing that just takes hold and runs rampant in the United States.
Unless it mutates, as Betsy
Well,
points out.
and I think I think this Dallas outbreak and this, side trip to Ohio are, as far as Ebola spread, dead ends. But for instance, today, Newark passenger was pulled off because he had a fever. He's a Liberian national who was flying into New York
from
via
Brussels.
This is how it's going to arrive in that way. And now, fortunately, everyone who's coming in from infected countries is going to be checked. But this epidemic is going to spread beyond the three index countries, if you will, or the index country and the two others. And that's the real issue: is, are we doing enough to try to corral it now that it's it's escaped the genie this time.
Yeah.
So are we lucky in Northeast Ohio that we had this scare because it got everybody prepared?
Yeah.
and
I think
thinking
so.
about it?
so.
Yeah.
I think
No
that's
harm
true.
so far.
Unless you own the bridal shop, which I can't.
Yeah,
believe
right,
that poor
See,
bridal
she
shop
could be out
owner.
of business.
Yeah.
It's been there a long
Unfortunately,
time,
people
though.
might
They
be
have a
very
deep
afraid.
clientele, and maybe people will be rational and realize they can't get
It's
it.
hard to be rational in what looks like a worldwide plague, potentially.
But it's important to be rational.
I
You know,
agree.
rational is a good thing.
I agree.
Rational's a
Yeah.
good thing, a good place to leave it. If you have thoughts on this, please leave your comment where this show is posted. I'm Chris Quinn. This is The Opinion Show. We'll see you next time.